Hello and welcome to the Horizons Music Podcast. I'm Nick Robertson, here with my co-host Ibrahim Munir.
And today I will be subbing out for special guest SENIOR Conrad Kleiner.
What? That's me.
All right, and here we are talking about Talk Talk's 1991 album,
Laughing Stock.
Laughing Stock.
Perfect album. Better than perfect.
It's a very good album. I wouldn't call it perfect, but I'd call it very good album.
You're right. I wouldn't call it perfect either. I'd call it better than perfect because it transcends the human realm.
Laughing Stock transcends the human realm. You heard it here first. And Talk Talk is the London-born, London-based, originally a synth-pop band formed in 1981. And over time, they transformed more into an experimental group until their final album, Laughing Stock 1991, before they broke up. They released 6 albums, I believe, or 5 albums.
5.
Over their 10 years. And they're all quite good. But Laughing Stock wasn't received too kindly when it first came out. It got mixed reviews, but over time has really shown a lot of great appreciation from the overall music community.
As an album, it's a progenitor. If you look at what the album has inspired, it sits next to what I would call some of the most influential albums, at least in the last 30 or so years.
Mm-hmm.
Slint's Spiderland, also instrumental in starting what would become known as the post-rock scene, which is what this album really helped kick off. In my opinion, it sits next to Loveless and Nevermind as hallmarks of the 90s. Both albums that came out in 1991. 1991 was a very good year for music. What's really interesting about this album is that you talk about how they were a synth pop band. Their lead man was this guy named Mark Hollis, recently died, past 2 weeks or so, which is what inspired me to give this album to Nick. I say inspired like it was some big revelation, but it's literally just like, hey, listen to this, right? So his vision as a songwriter, for whatever reason, he always wanted to have this really specific setup, and he accomplished it for the last 2 albums after he reached enough success to where it was financially viable, and his record label, EMI, let him do it. The setup was, basically, he just spent a year going through, like hundreds of session musicians, jazz musicians, just recording everything they did and saying, this was good, and just splicing it all together. And so what you're hearing when you listen to this album, it's not one coherent piece of music. Well, it is, but it's not recorded simultaneously. It's chopped up. It's sectioned. It's a bunch of different pieces of brilliance from all these different musicians all coming together in like Mark Hollis's vision.
And you can really tell when you listen to it. It's 6 tracks, 43 minutes. They're all very long tracks. The 2 longest coming in at 9 minutes and 40 seconds each.
That'd be After the Flood and New Grass, right?
Yeah. And they're both... there's a lot of lengthy music, but it's good music. And you said there's a lot of jazz influences. It's very minimalist in a sense.
Yes.
Which I really enjoy. It's very soothing. This is not something you'll throw on your pop playlist, but this is more something that you can relax in the evening, put on a nice album, and think.
It is a thinking album, and what's really nice about the minimalism is that it doesn't stay that way for too long.
Yeah.
Every album is or every song is highlighted normally at least once. In the case of Ascension Day or After the Flood, it happens a couple times throughout the lengthy run times by this really aggressive maximalist stance. It stands out, whereas it has these little parts you would hear in punk music, but it sounds more like the fermata climax of a classical piece than anything you would ever expect from a 70s or 80s band.
And as a classical musician myself, I really feel that. I've played a lot of classical music over the years in classes here at Walnut, and I see the inspiration of the movement of the piece from beginning to end on each track. And Ascension Day, it's a slow climax to the very end, and it abruptly cuts off, right going into After the Flood, which is starts with 5-10 seconds of near silence. It's very abrupt and shocking and creates a really interesting feeling when you're listening to it and focusing on the music. And listening to that the first time, it was really interesting to me. And talking about the rest of their discography, Talk Talk, I mean, you might know them from a couple of their really big hits, which is what I knew them by. Listening to this music, I wouldn't even have figured that Talk Talk made this album as well as their original singles that made them big. Those really big singles, It's My Life, for example, which is their biggest hit.
It's almost impossible to believe it's the same people and that it wasn't cycled out by producers or something. It's quite an anomaly in the music world that you can go from this to that. I call it an even bigger change than the Beatles. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a better change, but it's definitely a huge leap from your starting origins. Since I gave Nick the album, I'm going to ask him a few questions about it, get some perspective, some of my perspective. So, Nick, what were your favorite tracks off the album? Your favorite track, since it's pretty short.
I was thinking about this for a while, and it was pretty tough for me to pick one, because for me, they all kind of blended together into one big feeling, rather than like individual songs that you can think of like with a more traditional rock album. Like you can think, I liked these lyrics, and I liked this riff, but they all kind of melted together for me in a way, and especially with how it was put together and how they do blend for an aspect, it was very difficult for me to pick one that I really liked. Ascension Day probably stuck out a little bit more than the others, though I was really a fan of everything from beginning to end.
I absolutely agree. My favorite song, After the Flood, I have that song memorized. I can play it in my head, beginning to end. I love that song to death. I love the whole album to death. If I had to pick a least favorite track, I'd probably say Tap Head. But again, it's a track that serves to fill a mood rather than be a distinct musical idea. And I think the album would be lesser if the track was taken off, which is why I say it's difficult for me to call my least favorite track, because it's absolutely an essential track.
It's more of a least most favorite.
Yes,
yeah.
It's an essential track for an album that decides to maximize its highlights by minimizing its lowlights. Taphead needs to serve as the premonition to new grass in order for that song to really come out. And as a song in its own right, I mean, it's a calm, jazzy song. There's nothing wrong with it. It's kind of halfway not there, which is almost exactly what this album is going for most of the time, is whether or not like things really are there or not. It's so much of this album, it's what you're not hearing that comes in later than what you hear in the moment.
Yeah, and coming in at only 6 tracks, it is pretty hard to pick one. Given that they're lengthy and that, as you said, each one fills a spot in the lineup and towards the theme and the feeling of the whole album. This is definitely, this is not a put it on shuffle kind of thing. You got to listen to it beginning to end, and I like a lot of music like that. So that was really special.
So Talk Talk had 2 other albums, pretty similar. Color of Spring was probably the most popular in this style. It was completely composed on their own. Spirit of Eden, their 1988 album, 1988 album, was the original filling of this idea of just having these various musicians come in and have them give Mark Hollis, who basically was the lead guy on most everything Talk Talk did, the toolkit to craft these songs that he built. If you look at the album covers, they're almost they're very similar.
Yeah, they all follow the same style, which I really like.
I mean, Spirit of Eden and Laughingstock are both trees with birds, which is, but Laughingstocks, the leaves are gone. The birds are more pronounced. They're droopier. It looks something more like a Salvador Dali painting, whereas Spirit of Eden looked like a biblical allusion, as you would guess from the name of the album. And I think that's reflected a lot in the lyrics. Both albums are strongly religious standpoints from Mark's point of view. If you listen to the lyrics, he's talking about he's making religious. After the flood is basically just a Noah's Ark song, but much more personal than you'd expect from your regular, campy Bible song. It's not Christian rock in any way, shape, or form. Whereas Spirit of Eden was the bright side of religion. Laughingstock was very much a dark side of what can come with the faith that you might have as someone who prescribes to anything. I don't think it's exclusive to Christianity or even religion. I think it's a mediation on being enamored with something and the idea of being faithful.
Yeah. And I only listened through this a couple of times, so I couldn't get the complete understanding of the lyrics. But from my brief overview, I could tell that it was very personal, which adds to the feeling of the whole album, which is one of the reasons why I liked it so much. Overall, I'd probably give this a solid 7 or 8 in my book. While it's not one of my favorites of all time, it fills a niche in music that you don't find very often. It's very soothing. It's a calm album that I really just enjoyed putting on, sitting back and doing some work or reading a book or just in thinking. Because like you said, it's a thinking album. So that's probably what I thought of Talk in general.
I guess before we head out, personally, this album sits in my top 10. And I listen to albums like a madman, so that's out of like 300 or 400, just because I burned through albums like a wildfire. But this one stuck out to me. It's I think in terms of I give it a 10. I can understand why someone would give it less, just depending on their view. But I think in terms of raw influence and the impact it had on more underground scenes. Things that you wouldn't really see pop up. Indie bands such as Animal Collective, another one of my favorites, who see this experimental jazzy style, and it's more of an influence in how you can do things rather than the music itself. It's not it helped create post-rock, but post-rock as a genre is more just an advancement of the idea of what you can do with your traditional rock tools. It's not defined by any one sound, and I think that's where Talk's influence lies. Is just listening to this album and really reading about how it was made. It's the idea of what you can do with music in any regard. I think it's just totally expanded.
Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be surprised if this album grew on me in the future as I listen to it more and more. It was definitely enjoyable, and I definitely recommend that anyone give it a listen, at least for a little bit, because it's worth the experience. Given that, this has been the Horizons Music Podcast. I'm Nick Robertson.
I'm Conrad Kleiner.
And thanks for listening.